welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris for Pragmatic Institute, your host for this episode. As product professionals, one of our core missions is to evangelize our products, right? To advocate for our strategies. We are constantly asked to speak about or write about our vision and our products, but it doesn't mean we like it, right? In fact, the fear of public speaking, also known as glossophobia, for those of you playing along with your bingo card at home, affects an estimated 75% of the population, right? Meaning most of us experience at least some level of anxiety when we're presenting, right? But even if we're part of the 25% who aren't afraid, it doesn't mean we do it really well. And yet, for us as product people, so often, whether or not our products are bought, also whether or not our visions are bought into, right? Whether or not we get our strategies in place really is dependent on how well we tell the story, how well we present these narratives. So to help us conquer the fear and improve our speaking and storytelling, I'm extremely excited to have on today Blair Bryant Nichols, who is the owner of BBN Creative Management for diverse and mission-driven talent. Blair is an expert in strategic speaking platforms, helps guide speakers and business leaders through the nuances of public and corporate speaking. So he's going to be a great sort of Sherpa on our guide today. Welcome, Blair.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. I always like to start everybody off, Blair, by just kind of asking their origin story, right? Like, how did you get where you are? What is the superpower that makes you great at what you do and so passionate about what you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, the not so short answer is I started off in the speaking industry right out of college. Really, as my first big job was at HarperCollins at the publishing house in their speakers bureau. They were the first publisher to have one, and from there, it's been just kind of a crazy road from going from there to agencies. And so I was in New York, and then I moved to LA 12 years ago and worked with another speaker thought leader who was also running a consulting firm. And, along the way, I just kept kind of circling back to the speaking industry, as well as just working directly with talent and helping people, uncover both their skills and their talents and helping, them tell their story and figure out their message and their positioning and all of those other things. So I've had just an interesting career kind of on different sides and different roles around this industry, as well as getting my MBA at UCLA in entertainment management. I've just been really interested in, like the different intersections that as you yourself are a brand, a person, a product, like, all the different ways that you can leverage that thought leadership, your expertise, your story to advance whatever goals that you may have. So I started off just as an assistant and loved kind of this world that I didn't really know existed. I had seen speakers at college, but wasn't thinking about the people behind them that might be negotiating those deals or arranging those types of events. We think about agents and managers in other industries of entertainment and media, but speaking might not be one that everyone's as familiar with. And then I just, over time saw how it has so many applications across all the industries and all roles. And now, of course, storytelling is not a new topic on the marketing circuit or the leadership circuit, but it's something that I do think, especially for product managers, when so much of your role can be about the specifics and like the facts and figures and the dimensions and whatever that may look like for you, those numbers, that isn't really what sells, right? I think we all know like a lot of industries face a lot of competition and usually you can compete pretty well on those numbers, but no one has your story. No one can, sell your vision like Rebecca mentioned, like you can. And so that's your superpower for you is being able to tell your own story and connect and understand your client or customer, potential client or customer better, hopefully, and actually create a real emotional connection because people want to work with and buy from people they know, like, and trust. And it's hard to get to any of those levels if you don't get to know someone and get to have some sort of emotional connection. So if someone's up on stage doing a keynote, we talk about the same thing. It's all about telling a story, opening especially with a story so that you can connect with that audience. And now they want to follow you. Now they're now you have permission to share your knowledge, that it's going to now be someone that's listening and probably more connected to what your message is, and then also wrapping up with the story. So I think it's important how you end things. Of course, we know people remember the beginnings and the ends more than they remember the middles of things. So how you end your pitch, or how you might end, a meeting with a client by wrapping up also with a story, I think can be so powerful, again, because you've now kind of taken control of how you want them to feel and what you want to get across. And hopefully that will keep moving that conversation forward or just deepen that relationship. But yeah, that's kind of like the big picture of where I've been and what excites me about this conversation.
Absolutely. And I love that no one else has your story, and that your story is your superpower in so many ways. There's lots of stuff that I want to talk about and unpack there. I think before we dive into storytelling, I think it is interesting to think about speakers, right? Because it is not the most common talked about of the marketing aspects, as you said, but it's also, I think it's also an underutilized aspect of product management and product marketing, being speakers. Like, you think about conferences and how much impact you can have, not on being an exhibitor, but on speaking at those conferences. But a lot of it is not just the bio that you bring, but it's the story that you bring, right? And that's important for your brand and your product, but also for your own personal career, which is something I know you talk to a lot of people about, is developing yourself as a speaker helps near-term and long-term as you plan where you want to go.
Absolutely. And to your point, like, that's one of the best opportunities you might have in a corporate role, is to leverage those resources to seek out those, like, again, you might already be an exhibitor or a sponsor of different events within your industry that highlight your products, that connect you with customers. But how much better would it be if you were up on stage connecting with those clients and customers, both through your story and sharing valuable knowledge and valuable information that they're going to, how much more likely are they going to want to seek out your product or come talk to you when they've seen you on stage, versus how many people can you meet walking by the booth, or is you're connecting hand to hand at an event. So I don't want to let that point go by without saying, yeah, that's one of the big things that I think people do forget, whether they're entrepreneurs, business owners, or working within companies, is how powerful that can be for your own brand building, but also as what you're trying to do in that role and in that event. It just elevates everything that you're looking to accomplish as a product manager too, because you're getting it, and now you're actually creating an emotional connection to the product as well, and tying all of this valuable information to that. So if you can think about, the problems and the higher level messages that might accompany, the problems that your product solves, and bring that into your presentation, then it really just amplifies your investment of spending time at an event like that. And I will tell you that not every time will they offer maybe a speaking slot as part of a sponsorship, but what's more valuable, you getting up in front of all of these clients, or having your logo on a lanyard or on a step and repeat? Like, you can negotiate if you're going to invest in going to these places and ask for stage time, or see if you can lead a breakout session. And I think a lot of conferences, this is part of their business model. And you'll see obviously people from big tech companies and other companies on the bill as panelists and as speakers, and that's most likely because they are also sponsors of the event. So it's a transparent way, but it's an effective way. And it's something that if the big companies are doing it, then it can work for smaller companies just as well, and sometimes it even be that much more impactful, because it's introducing your brand and your product to a whole new audience. So yeah, I can't stress that enough, that that's a really big avenue for you to pursue.
And I also think that when you're good at telling the story, you not only get opportunities outside of your company to pitch it potentially at conferences, but you get additional opportunities inside the company, right? As someone who has led product teams and been a product manager myself, the more you can tell the story, the more you get to tell the story to the next level, right? Like, you do a good job telling the story to your boss takes you to the meeting where you get to say it to the leadership team. Then they get to go to the board, right? These are also permission levels that you get by presenting it well, right? They want to trust you. They want to hear the story from you, and then they trust you to tell it correctly. So wherever you're doing it, however nervous or not you are about doing it, I think really spending time on how you're presenting and how you're telling the story is key. So let's break it down. When you're helping people, you talked a little bit about the bookends, which I think is really smart too. We often talk about the story in the beginning, like the hook. I don't know that we always remember to do the goodbye story, right? The leave them at the moment and whether or not those are connected. But what else, when you think about a good narrative and a good story, how do you help the speakers you work with kind of really develop that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful if they have already taken the time to kind of peruse their own memories and make a list and are, like it's definitely like an exercise where we spend some time just thinking through like different anecdotes, different stories, or I've seen video footage and the different stories they may tell. And I think it's something that can be so tailored to your client or customer that I think I would really spend the time thinking about how can I connect with this particular client that I think based on like what I know about them, like this might, connect. And so I'm going to tell a story about like an impactful sporting event that I went to, with my dad, because I know that they're a really big sports fan. And like, I think this is like a really, good example of both something I want to share and like a way that I feel like they'll like understand. So I think it can be about the audience, but I think it should be, like thinking about good examples that really help tie people into both maybe your vulnerability when something didn't go your way. I mean, not just bragging about your accomplishments, but talking about the failures or the mistakes, I think is a great way to kind of, endear people to you in the beginning, and also through humor, like if you can work humor into it in an effective way that's non-offensive, I think that can be obviously a great way to break the ice and get people kind of engaged just as a strategy. So starting off that way. And I do think that vulnerability and the authenticity that people, feel is portrayed by that is the most important element. I think being on and scripted, especially if, you have kind of a script, honestly, sometimes in your corporate role that you may need to follow in how you talk about your product, but you need to kind of break away from that mentality when you're telling your story so that it feels natural and it feels authentic and that you can be really present, in how you're presenting it. So the actual stories, I don't think matter as much as long as they, as they demonstrate and bring the feelings to light that you really want, and that they can then kind of like give you something to circle back to in the end, because that's really what we want. We want to like kind of close the loop. So even if you told a story about going to a sporting event with your dad in the beginning, and then the whole thing, nothing about sports is going to be at all attached to your product, you can bring it back to that in the end. And then that feels then like they've absorbed everything, and they feel kind of, even more like they have, got a complete picture, when sometimes people end and we're kind of like, oh, what did we learn? Or,
Right,
what
right.
was that? Like,
What was the
okay,
moral?
I
Mhm.
forgot even what the beginning was all about. And then all they remember is the end. And if you hadn't done a good job there, then, it's not going to go as well. So I think, again, those bookends, and then what leads you to that. And I wanted to touch on another point that you brought up, though, because people often assume that if they want to pursue speaking and they work, for a corporation or something like that, that they have to seek outside events or conferences, or it might be in the context of those other events that we talked about. But I do think there's power in even volunteering to do lunch and learns within your own company, talking to other teams, like volunteering to lead workshops that you may want to like pursue as something that you want to do as a speaker that might be adjacent to even your product, storytelling, etc. But to Rebecca's point, it gives you more experience, it gives you more opportunities to facilitate. And I have had clients who were in corporate jobs and they were doing that and offering to do workshops that now that's their full-time job. They lead these workshops and they coach people, and that's because that's what they wanted to do with that. But even if you just want more experience in practice, you don't have to go outside. I mean, I always say, you can go to your church or your school or your kids' school or wherever you can volunteer to speak and add value. Like, that's good experience. But if you have a corporate job, then definitely try to leverage it, because it's also great for building your brand within your organization and getting the attention of others, and should, hopefully introduce more opportunities for you.
Yeah. No, and I think it's interesting when we think about stories from a product manager and product marketing perspective, right? We often tell stories, and our instinct may be to tell the story of our product. But I really think what we want to do is tell the story of our persona, right? The people who would buy our product, who are affected by it, who use it, right? And it's their story and the pain points they have that are going to bring the emotional connection to external audiences, but it also helps ground internal audiences on why we're doing what we're doing, right? And I think that can be a little challenging when we're talking about storytelling as a product perspective, because I am talking about an outside person, right, who's going to buy the product, and I'm going to tell their story and how it's going to affect it. But if I'm talking to my exec team, I do have to, I have to draw them. I have to, there's a bit of a what's in it for them, right? Like, that's great. I'm thrilled that my persona is extra happy, but like, how is that going to drive retention? How is that going to drive referrals? Or how is that going to lower customer support costs? Whatever it is, right? There is the story of the persona and the effect of that in a company that I think makes for really compelling stories. And there always has to be, pain points in a story, right? There always has to be struggles. And I think seeing it through the ends of the persona really helps us stay grounded.
Oh, absolutely. And like, that's why one of the most powerful things you can do is tell a story about an actual client or an actual customer and the change that it made. If you, can bring those to life, it's just like having a testimonial as a speaker. It's just having someone actually that, can put proof to what you're describing. And then some of those questions around like, and how it affects the ROI and the business bottom line, like that's where you can defer to some of the numbers. And hopefully that's where product features and other things like support that end. But it also, now you've leveraged both. You can talk to potential customers like in telling that story, and it can connect to your executives and maybe put them in the client and the customer perspective, while you can also then shift hats or shift gears and talk about now on what this means for us, and what it means for our sales team, et cetera. So I love that, because I definitely agree. I think that's such a good internal use of that, while always knowing your audience and what their needs are, and being prepared to address those things particularly.
I think we bring a good point too, because we just talked about like the 5 or 6 audiences that story would be relevant to. And it's also true when you guys are working with like speakers in a speaker bureau, right? Like, there are stories someone is known for, but then there is a certain level of tailoring it to the audience, right? So how do you, from your job perspective, because now I'm curious, how much do like the speakers tailor, and how do you guys talk about that? But then also, when they do really tailor, how do you guys help them do that, or how do they go? What's their process?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's everyone's got their own process, but I'd say probably the tailoring is really 20 to 30%. Like, it can't be 100%. I mean, there's so many times where I know they like, where I'm writing a whole new keynote or I'm doing a whole new thing, and like, that's not uncommon. So sometimes they truly are tailoring very, even up to the minute, because they want to be super current. And others, most of the time, if you want quality delivery, like they've delivered this content enough that it's very, they're not scripted, but they're very competent at it. And so the tailoring comes into sometimes their story choice and how they open and who they talk to, but also just in their examples that they use, the language that they use. I've seen a speaker who was talking to a room full of people who all worked from home and kept talking about, like during when you commute to the office, and kind of kept referencing like
just missing it
as like part of their lifestyle, and wasn't connecting to that wasn't part of their lifestyle. And that was like kind of a big disconnect for this audience. So I think just in the language, and they choose, and they can speak the same language of how they call their teams and their divisions and their hierarchies and their slogan, like, just being able to slip some of those things in. So some of the best speakers that I work with and that I know, they spend time up front. There's always going to be a pre-call, and some speakers have specific questions that they like answered, whether it's a questionnaire, survey, or just informal on the phone. And they're asking about, the audience and how do you want them to feel afterwards? And they're asking about like, what changes would you like to help implement? So they're really thinking about this particular audience and how they can hopefully, try to meet the objectives of the meeting planners and the leadership and the stakeholders there. And they're also spending time interviewing other people, like stakeholders. So some of my speakers will ask like, hey, is there 5 people that I can talk to? Like, whether it's from the sales team or the relevant audience, just to get different perspectives, to get that kind of vocabulary. And I think that really then he and she and the other speakers that do that, they work that into their keynote where the things that they know and like kind of like the things that connect them to that company particular, like being like an insider that people love and they appreciate that they're able to really weave that in. So I think the more you are curious, the more people you talk to, don't just assume like you can walk in and give the same talk and walk out. The more you actually do tailor or at least absorb as much as you can so that you feel like you really know who you're talking to, I think makes a big impact.
I really like that balance too. Part of the thing with product people is that like we're really, really deep in the details of what we do. And part of, again, we're charged with communicating our product and the product vision and where we're going. So there is a level of consistency and repetition, more so than we often are comfortable with, that is really, really necessary. Like I have to keep saying this because everyone else goes and does something else while I live and breathe this every day. So I have to ground us here, right? So having that core piece that is consistent, but then thinking every time before you go and tell that core piece, who am I talking to, right? What matters to them? Where are they? What's their point of view? What are their concerns? What are their roadblocks? And using that 20, 30% to tailor it and to pick the right set of stories, right? The idea of a library of stories in your head is a good one, right? That you can use to make it seem tailored and personal. And then I think to your point, making the stories feel real, organic, authentic, I think is a powerful play there. But I love that combination of you have a set stuff that's baked that you're going to say, because that is our role. But then really thinking of the audience as a way of tailoring it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And always keeping that middle part fresh, and how you do it. And again, most of the time, the speakers I work with aren't seeing the same audiences again and again. Not necessarily, some do. And then they really are kind of charged with doing something different this time around. So they're not just looking for a repeat. But if you're speaking to the same constituents a lot, like you might need to switch things up and get a little creative, even if it is kind of the same thing. So like all of that is valuable.
Do you have any other sort of favorite tips or hints that you give people about speaking in general? It doesn't even have to just be storytelling, but when they're getting ready for either the big pitch with the board or the big pitch with the client, or they've got that coveted spot at the conference, what are some of those just like best practices?
Yeah, well, I mean, it maybe sounds simple, but you got to practice. Like, I think a lot of people are shy even about doing this in the mirror, but you have to read things out loud. You have to be able to.
The out loud part, people forget. They're like, but I read it in my head. I'm like, no, you have to speak. You have to use the voice.
Very different. And like, how you may write is going to be different than what might be the simplest and clearest way to say something. So practicing so that it can become innate. So you don't need to be scripted or, you don't rely on notes or anything like that. I think working off an outline and having that is really valuable, but just practicing with other people. It's like we always joke about stand-up comedians, like they have to go to like small clubs and work out material, but that's going to be the same for you with some of these stories, like working out some of the anecdotes. Some work better and some might fall flat. And then you might need to kind of rethink or pull from your library of something else. So I think always just having the humility that no one at this is not constantly trying to get better. Even the best speakers are doing all these same things and are, always trying to hone their craft and are feeling nervous, honestly, most of the time before they go out on stage. But it is like anything. It's a skill you can learn. It's something you can practice that can become a lot more comfortable. And I like it even just for when you meet someone. Oh, what do you do? Okay, how fun is that question to answer? I'm a product manager at X. Like, okay, what product? So it's, you can now just be prepared with even a 30-second version of, maybe both, your role and like a little bit about what you're doing so that it feels super comfortable to kind of leverage that for a connection and can carry on from there. So I think that even just thinking about it in terms of networking and other things you're doing on a daily basis, not just for big presentations, not for big conferences all the time, but even just day-to-day things and how that might increase, your how effective you are as a communicator.
I love it. What about for those who are like, you know what? I want to be seen as more of a speaker. I have a couple of product managers who've worked for me, and one in particular, he's an outstanding speaker. But I think it's something, again, that leaning into how you might make that a bigger part of your personal brand is not something we often like pause and think about. So this is what you do for a living. So I don't expect you to give us all the secret sauce.
Oh, please.
Blair, but talk to us a little bit about like, hey, you know what? I want to lean into this. This is a skill set. I want to use speaking as a way to help build my own personal brand. What would be your hints and tips there?
Yeah. So like the things I mentioned earlier, like just get out there and speak, whether it's your church or school or within your company or at your friend's company or, asking for opportunities wherever those may be. And, starting with where you are the most known, starting with where you have expertise. Like we've talked about these conferences and events. Well, you can pursue these things. And like speaking is not all reactive. In fact, most of it is the speakers pursuing these opportunities. And a lot of these conferences just have open calls for submissions. So even if you just want to get started and just want to apply to some relevant conferences and, have kind of your talk summary and your different elements that they ask for, pull it all together, but see where then you can go and deliver that, and get some footage of it, or see where you can just get some practice, doing it wherever you can. And I think the more you speak, the more you'll speak. And that's the simple thing I kind of always say is like speaking begets more speaking, because when people see you, then, oh, you should come talk to my group, or, hey, would you do this thing? So you kind of have to be it to be it. And in putting yourself out there on social media now is a big part of it. That is sharing your thought leadership. It's putting your value out in the way that people are going to look for speakers for their events. And our generations are aging and using social media and connecting with speakers in those platforms. So LinkedIn is great, but people are going to find speakers on Instagram and on TikTok and other platforms. You don't have to do it all, but you have to think about where else you can be kind of present if this is really what you want. And yeah, certainly we can dive a lot deeper. You can get a free 30-minute call with me, but in general, like there's a path for everyone. And I always think there's a strategy for everyone. And it depends on a lot of different factors, but, like what you can use it to build business and you can use it to accomplish other goals. But I would just say like, you got to start, and the more you do, the more you'll do.
Yeah, no. And I really love that the more you speak, the more you speak, right? Like it begets each other. And I also think, because I am older, not much, but yeah, no, but social as an avenue, social as a way to, you don't just have to get booked in a room to speak, right? You have platforms, you can use them. And also, that's video can be a powerful way to practice, to share, to get feedback, and to start to build that brand, the brand up. And it's also powerful sort of proof when someone's considering a speaker. If they can see some of that interactions, they want to see what it looks like and feels like, that can be very powerful too.
Exactly. Nailed it. Yeah. That's just, they want to get the vibe. They want to see how you present. They want to see, like the overall kind of nature of it, but they don't need 15, 30 minutes. Like their attention span, 2 to 3 minutes, maybe 4 on the high end is when we talk about like sizzle reels, when people are cutting up video clips. So definitely you can host your own webinars. You can do all the things to leverage your platforms and just try it out. A lot of times you're not going to have huge audiences, but that's good. That's a great way to practice.
That's the practice, right? Well, and it's, if you can't hold my attention for 2 minutes, then I'm not going to book you for 30. So
exactly.
Right. So like, let's see if we can go there first. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Blair, we talked about lots of different things today. If you were going to have listeners do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be? I'd
say think about how you can use your voice today. Where can you add value? go out and where you normally might not have spoken up, whether it's something just casual, even said hello to someone, try doing that a little bit more. I think that's one of the first things that keeps us all from connecting and from thinking of ourselves as someone with valuable information to share. And the second thing then is along those lines is keep in mind that you know a lot more than what you assume other people know. The reverse of imposter syndrome is assuming that everyone knows what you think. You know, it's like that. It goes along with imposter syndrome. So stop assuming that you have nothing valuable to share beyond your story. You have expertise and knowledge, and there's a lot of people who are not where you're at, whether it's in your career or in other areas. And I imagine there's things you're passionate about, and so find the things that you want to share. And I think you'll really find a lot of value in doing it.
That's super interesting too, because I do think often if you think about the things that you think are the easiest that you do, those are often the places that you add the most value because they are easy to you, right? And your assumption is they're easy to everyone. Like, oh, that's easy. Everyone does that. And they're like, no, stop, wait, they don't. And that's a place to explore and be like, wow, why is it easy to me? Why does this seem simple and like not a problem? And how do I help other people do it? Or how do I tell the story of how I do it? I think that's great advice. So. All right. Blair, thank you very much for coming on. If people wanted to take you up on your 30-minute offer or wanted to learn a little bit more about what you do, where should we send them?
You can go straight to my website. It's bbncreativemanagement.com. So Blair Bryant Nichols. So that's where the BBN comes from. And you can also find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, both BBN Creative Management and Blair Bryant Nichols.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to chat.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.